Now let's dive into that conference, Jared Smith, and look at the Big 12 bracket. Because, look, Houston has obviously been the team in that league this year. They only have one loss, and that was at home to Texas Tech, who is the number 2 seed. Caleb Love and Arizona are going to be your 3 seed. BYU is the 4 seed. If you're watching on YouTube or on Twitch, you can see the bracket there up on your screen. Iowa State's the 5. Then you have Kansas 6, Baylor 7, West Virginia as the 8 seed. And then obviously some games taking place today. You had Cincinnati defeat Oklahoma State, Colorado TCU going on now, Kansas State, Arizona State, and UCF Utah going on later. This is an interesting one, Jared, because, again, I think the consensus is that certainly people like Houston to win this Big 12 tournament, but I've seen a bunch of people make the case for Texas Tech. I've seen some Iowa States. I've seen some Kansas there. Obviously, playing in front of a good home crowd in Kansas City. BYU's been as hot as anybody in college basketball. How do you kind of handicap this Big 12 conference tournament?
Yeah, the way, and I kind of treat it the same way as I do the ACC, right? Like, obviously, the favorite deserves to be the favorite. Duke deserves to be the favorite in the ACC. Houston absolutely deserves to be the favorite in this conference. The bottom of the bracket is where the pivot point takes place. Texas Tech and Arizona are very intriguing teams. I heard you make a case for Kansas. I think if they catch lightning in a bottle, I don't love Kansas in the later rounds because I think they're a little bit limited physically. And I think the wear and tear of the back-to-back-to-backs eventually will bite Kansas. I think Arizona does have upside. I think Caleb Love does have upside. The problem is he's so damn inconsistent. You just don't know when him and Bradley are going to put their best stuff together. Texas Tech is definitely the level team in the bottom of the bracket. I think I know what I'm going to get from the Red Raiders most nights. I absolutely love what I've seen from them this year. Arizona beat them down in Tucson. It was a very, I'll call it average shooting night. They shot about 30% from 3, about 57% from the floor. They turned it over 14 times. The difference is Texas Tech did not have a good shooting day. Sub 40% from 2. And they actually did make a lot of threes in that game, but not a great Texas Tech, not your typical Texas Tech performance. Again, they're one of the better teams, top 30 in EFG percentage on the season. Number 1 in turnover rate in the Big 12, number 2 in EFG rate in the Big 12. So Texas Tech is just so darn consistent. It's tough to fade them, but in a one-game roll of the dice, I think Arizona has the stones, right? They've got the upside to knock off Texas Tech. They did it earlier this year. Now, the game in Lubbock was a slog, and Arizona really struggled to score in that game. They lost by 16 and really didn't shoot it well. So I think if I had to pick it, if I had to make one bet in this tournament, I think I'd make Texas Tech the pick. But I think a Texas Tech-Arizona semifinal's got a lot of juice to it. That could be a really interesting game, especially if Caleb Love gives you his best stuff. But in general, Houston's going to be a favorite throughout. So if you want to bet Houston, just know you're on the chalky side there.
Jared, whenever I'm a handicap in these major conference tournaments, I'm always trying to think about who could be the team that could win it. That when we get to Sunday and the bracket gets unveiled, who the team is that's going to win their conference tournament, and then everybody starts to fall in love with that team, right? It happens like every year. And that team usually has an early exit in March Madness. And for me, there's a clear candidate in the Big 12, and that's Iowa State. I could see this team, how they started the season. They were number 2 seed last year in the tournament. They bring a lot of pieces back. They start the season great. They lost to Auburn by 2 in Maui. They're up like 20 at halftime. They still lose that game. Then they had some guys in and out of the lineup. They suffer some injuries, but now everybody's back. And I could see Iowa State going on a run, winning the Big 12 tournament, and then you turn on all these shows and you listen to everybody talk, and they talk about Iowa State, right? They talk about the Auburns and the Dukes, but they're like, if you want a sleeper, if you want a national title team not to forget about, it's Iowa State. And I always like trying to think about and figure out who those teams could be in this conference tournament. And for me, Iowa State would be the clear team. I think obviously if Houston wins it, right, a lot of people just look at it as, well, they were the best team. They're a number 1 seed regardless of what happens in Kansas City. No surprise there. Texas Tech is intriguing. They're like a 2 or a 3 seed right now. If they win the Big 12, they certainly kind of fall in that category as well. So for me, it's really those 2 teams. It's Texas Tech and Iowa State as I'm kind of treating as those teams. BYU is hot right now. And obviously they just had that big win at Iowa State. So I like that for Iowa State, right? They're going to get Cincinnati tomorrow, win that game. Then you get BYU, revenge for winning in Ames. I think they take care of business. The interesting angle for Houston, Jared, is the way that they play. I just don't know if Houston has a switch where they can just like go through the motions, where they can just turn it off and kind of treat this tournament like we're kind of all expecting Auburn to treat it in the SEC. And keep in mind, last year, they played Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game and got smoked in that game.
Yeah.
So I certainly think if they get to that point again, Kelvin Sampson, his players, they'll all remember that and will try and win it. And also the fact this is the second year in the Big 12 for them, right? And they can win their first Big 12 championship, I think means something to them. You sweep the regular season. So I don't really worry about Houston having like a letdown or them not trying or not coming to play. I think if they lose, they just have an off night, and the team that they lose to played better than they do. But yeah, Texas Tech and Iowa State are the two teams that I would look at. We were talking about Kansas last night, and again, I just like the fact that Bill Self's team has really never been in this role where they've lost this many games in Big 12 play. They're going to be this low of a seed in March Madness, and you just kind of like teams that are trying to get some momentum going into the tournament, teams that are trying to get some wins to feel good about themselves. So that would maybe be the angle for Kansas. But Jared, if I had to take a team in the Big 12, I think it would be Iowa State for me at 6-1.
See, here's the thing about Iowa State, and I love Otzelberger. I love the lineup. I think they're about as talented as any team in the country, maybe when they're at their peak. They haven't played a lot together this year. Mm-hmm. And when you're asking players that are not used to being on the floor together to all of a sudden mesh and gel in a very short period of time at the highest level of intensity, that's where I could see Iowa State being maybe a little bit, I don't want to say overvalued, but not a team that I want to bet on in this tournament. If they win this week and they're able to make it through what was a very, I would say, very difficult Big 12 this year. I know the SEC is going to get all the flowers for the conference season that they had, but I think the Big 12, last year it was record-breaking. This year not as record-breaking, but still very prolific. If they can make it through this, I actually would be higher on Iowa State heading into the tournament, because if they can figure out a way to come together as a team, despite I think I'm only playing with each other for a handful of games this year, that actually makes me more impressed. I'm actually more impressed about that. I like your angle on Houston not winning the Big 12 last year. I think that is a feather in the cap of Kelvin Sampson and a bulletin board type thing that he is going to use this week, saying that you've done it all, guys, but you haven't won the Big 12 championship yet. You've won the regular season 2 years in a row, didn't win the Big 12 championship. Now, they did exact some revenge on Iowa State a little bit early in the year. They did beat them. I don't know where that game was. I think it was in Houston. Yeah, it was at Houston. They beat them by 9 back on February 22nd. So they at least exacted a little bit of that revenge on Iowa State a little bit early in the year. The thing about Texas Tech, and here's why I'm not overly enthused about betting Texas Tech. I think it's plus 350-ish to win the Big 12. They're going to be a big dog in that championship game, right? They were a 9.5-point dog at Houston on February 1st. They were a 4.5-point home underdog against Houston on February 24th. They're going to be a 7-ish point dog in the championship game against Houston, which means they're probably going to be around a 2-1 dog on the money line. So if you really like Texas Tech, just wait till they get past Arizona, which is no easy task, and then just bet them on the money line in the championship game. You know, you're going to sacrifice a little bit of juice there, but at least you're in the final and it's a one-game roll of the dice, and you're not up against Caleb Love perhaps having a 70% 7 for 10 kind of flamethrower shooting night, and all of a sudden your plus 325 is in the toilet before you even get to the title game. So I don't think I'm getting enough meat on the bone with Texas Tech to actually make that wager. I like the Iowa State angle because if they are able to upset Houston, maybe they'll even be a favorite in that championship game, and then you can come back on the other side. So I think of the bets to make, right? Like, I like Texas Tech. I think they can win this tournament. I think they have all the pieces in place. But from a number standpoint, I don't see a lot of value on the Red Raiders. I think Iowa State's a decent bet. But I'll be honest, of all the angles we've discussed, I think Houston not having won the tournament yet is actually the biggest motivating angle I can find during this little discussion we just had.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. And again, just the fact that they only know how to play one way. Like anytime you turn on a Houston game, they are playing as hard as any team in the country. So when you worry about some of these teams, we just talked about that with Duke when we preview the SEC a little bit later coming up in the third hour, like certainly a motivation for Auburn isn't with question. They probably have wrapped up the number one overall seed. You don't have to worry about that with Houston. So yeah, I mean, look, if somebody wants to take even money on Houston, like you said, Jared, probably the smallest favorite that they would end up being in the Big 12 tournament would be to Texas Tech or Iowa State. And you're looking at that game probably being anywhere from like 6.5 to probably 8, like somewhere in that neighborhood. So, I mean, even money with Houston certainly could be a good bet.